welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I'm your host, Jessica, and I am here with the author of a book called GALLOWAY'S Gospel, which is wild in so many ways. I don't know how to describe it. It's a book. It's horror. It's about cults, but I mean, it's also about the power of imagination.
Sure, yeah.
It's so there's we can get into that later. But welcome,
Okay.
Sam. Or rather, why don't you tell our audience, tell us who you are and tell us about this book.
Sure. I am Sam Rebelein. This is the third book in the Renfield County universe. This is a world that I've been working on for like a decade. I wanted it to be a place of, kind of gothic-y, sort of fun, spookiness, Tim Burton-y kind of vibe. I mean, I got really into the old Universal monster movies, and those are kind of humorless in a way, but I think that the sets and the world itself has this kind of like kooky edge to it that clearly, and I mentioned Tim Burton too, but like Tim Burton pulls out in his work. And so I wanted Renfield to feel kind of like that it's this valley where anything is possible in kind of a dark way, but also in kind of a fun, kooky way. You know, I wanted it to feel like a place that, even though it's filled with things that could mutilate you, you still might want to visit if you wanted to. So Galloway's Gospel is set in this cursed valley where strange things have been happening for nearly 100 years. And we focus on a girl who's grown up here. She's in high school now. Her name is Rachel Galloway. And she's bored in class. She starts drawing these little monsters. And her classmates, you know, they've also grown up here. They're sort of primed to believe in anything at this point. And so they start thinking that these monsters are real. And one of her friends, Frances, is really gung-ho about this and is really like encouraging her to turn these monsters into her own kind of like religion. She's got a class project coming up and she's like, maybe I can just BS this for my class project, which I think is like should be a motivator in more novels and movies, that like just trying to bullshit a class, you know. But of course things get out of hand. The monsters are actually real somehow. The entire town sort of unravels as this religion / cult starts taking over. And then we have another storyline 10 years later where we have this kind of like Men in Black type organization that is tasked with fighting all the weird things in Renfield County. And they get wind that this cult town, which has been separated from the rest of the county for the last 10 years after some cataclysmic event, they are now like the tunnel into that town is open again. And some kind of doomsday event is happening. Our hero, Rachel Durwood, knows that when cults talk about doomsday events, it's usually a kind of a bad thing. So she's like, I don't know what this is, but it seems like it needs to be stopped. So I'm going to go shut it down. And so I think that her story for me, because you were kind of talking about the various things that this story is about, Rachel Durwood's story is about grappling with grief and sort of ambiguous loss and fighting against it at every turn, even when the machine becomes too large to fight. You just still got to keep pushing. And I think Rachel Galloway's story is, like you said, about the power of imagination, but also just the power of stories, like how stories spiral out of control and how people take advantage of what stories are being told and control certain narratives, which is important to talk about this year. So that's a very long-winded and rambly answer as to what Galloway's Gospel is about.
Yeah, no, and I think, there's a lot of really good things in there. So the first two novels set in this world, what are they called?
We've got Edenville, and The Poorly Made and Other Things. And if anyone reads Galloway and is curious about Rachel Durwood's journey before that book, she is the main character in The Poorly Made and Other Things as well. So you get a greater sense of her overall journey. And Edenville is sort of dark academia, cosmic-y horror, ooky spookiness.
You do, and the thing is, it's good as a standalone also, I would say for sure. But I do like the whole, standalone yet expansive universe. It reminds me a little bit of Josh Mallerman has like Goblin
Sure,
and
yeah.
Sam Hatton, and there are these towns that are somewhat interconnected, and they always kind of come up somewhere in his stories. So that's kind of fun, just sort of having just this world, this sandbox to play in and sort of figure out what's where and what's happening. But I thought that it was really, again, like, so it was really interesting, like Rachel Galloway's whole thing, was very much of a teenage journey. She felt a little sad because she wasn't as conventionally pretty as her best friend.
Sure, yeah.
Somebody took notice of her.
Mhm.
Nobody really gave her also, even though her classmates thought that all of her drawings were cool or whatever, it's not like she really got the attention that she got from, the point that she created this new society and this fake colony that disappeared. And then it kind of starts coming to life, and it's horrific. And it's like I really felt like it was really interesting just kind of watching her journey versus her friend's journey, where like she was almost like, oh, okay, I don't
Yeah.
think that was supposed to happen. I kind of wish it didn't, but like, when do I should I hit the brakes? Can I hit the brakes?
Yeah.
And then just kind of watching everybody else fall around her, which is, I don't know if cult leaders ever say, should I hit the brakes? But she didn't, like, she wasn't a cult leader in that she wanted, like, it wasn't like she was really in it for the power. She was in it for, the community. And I suppose that's a motivator as well. And then Durwood, it was, they have the same name, and Rachel is like this holy name 10
Yeah.
years later because they
Right.
associate it with Galloway. But getting back to the whole power of imagination thing, like, I like this in stories a lot. I'm trying to remember exactly what it's called. It's like, what is it? Is it like Jungian thinking? It's like the never-ending story is sort of based on it.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Just this whole, like, everything that everybody's ever imagined
Hmm.
exists on this plane.
Yeah.
Famously, South Park did a couple of episodes about Imagination Land.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it does come from, I believe, Carl Jung and this whole theory that there is this dimension of imagination. And it was interesting kind of seeing it pulled in this way
Hmm.
to, I mean, you can't convince me the never-ending story isn't somewhat horror, the book and the movie.
Oh,
Um,
sure. Yeah.
110%.
Yeah.
But, here, it's like you could just see her thoughts. She, I mean, and not to spoil too much, but like some of the things she comes up with, she's like, you make offerings to the pigs and then they poop out miracles. I
Yeah.
mean, that is like, to me, I'm like, that is classic teenage bullshittery right there.
Totally. I was gonna say that, like, um, I was in 10th grade in 2009, and I had transferred to a school that was huge. We had thousands of kids, and I was getting lost going between classes and all this stuff. And So I was very much that kid who felt unseen and was I can't draw for shit. So I wasn't doodling monsters in class, but I was writing little stories and sketching out ideas on college ruled paper and whatever. And so that felt like an integral part of Galloway's arc from the get-go, that if you have this really vulnerable sort of outsider person who wants to be seen, and like I said, her one friend who's really gung-ho about it is this kind of like also weird outsider guy, Francis. And so what if you had this person who would feel activated if they were seen, and then the person seeing them is someone who's really ready to take advantage and be creepy with their story and all this stuff. And like I said, I'm just interested in how those stories spiral out of control. And imagination was a big component of Edenville as well, because I do believe that everything exists somewhere, and when we are writing, we are channeling or creating windows to these other places or something. But there's just something about the imagination that like no one understands. And people ask all the time on even podcasts like this, like, where do you get your ideas, or how do you think of stuff? And nobody knows. So it's like there's got to be something magical to it, right? Like there's got to be something. And so that from the jump was an important part of Galloway's story, is having her imaginary place be recognized by someone else, because I think that's kind of a dream for all of us. We all just want to be heard and have our thoughts recognized as valuable. And so yeah, that's was really a big part of the book for me.
Yeah, for sure. And like you said, what you were just talking about has a long history in psychology and different traditions. And it was just wild. It really was. And I don't want to give too much away. There were certain characters, you know, who I was like, what are you in this for exactly? And it could have changed. And I think that, that's also something that involves with people who get involved with cults. There's a lot of archetypes that we think of, whether it's somebody who feels disenfranchised or
Yeah.
somebody who feels they, want to, they need to like make their mark or whatever. But, I think the other part of that is, there's always the people who, I mean, look at like, I'm a big fan of reading about this whole thing, but like there was that book that came out a while ago called Cultish, which I believe,
Oh,
yes, the author has a
yes.
podcast. Yeah.
Yeah.
And she talks about the different types. There's the benign cults, and anybody who knows anybody who's been in an MLM, it 100% depends, there's different levels,
Hmm.
but they are kind of based on this hierarchy rather, of how cults work. I had a friend who was she did Tupperware, and she just straight out called it cult.
Well, and I was going to say
Yeah.
that Amanda Montell talks about CrossFit and like
Yes, that's
Lululemon, and
exactly where I was
yeah.
going with this.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But you continue, because it'll be more interesting when you talk about it.
Well, that was a really influential book while I was working on Galloway, because, and I was especially fascinated by her discussion of the like death tape from Jonestown, where he is very gently encouraging and using specific diction to get people to, because it wasn't like everyone said cheers and drank the Kool-Aid all at once. There were waves of like handing the Kool-Aid out and watching people have the spasms and all this stuff. And so his voice, like how do you guide hundreds of people through that experience? You have to not just be charismatic, but you have to use specific diction. And that's something that she talks about with CrossFit as well, that you're creating and using a certain jargon that people can get caught up in. And that's a very easy activator for people to feel either included or excluded or smart or stupid, my dad is a professor, and when he says certain things in a certain way, I'm like, oh, that makes me feel so dumb or whatever. It's as people conditioned to be social beings, it's so easy to feel like you're being pushed on the outside. And especially with CrossFit, where you have to stay on top of your workouts, and it's a way of life, so you're doing things outside of the gym and all that. And so that, especially when I was thinking about the language that they use in the town 10 years later, when the cult has really entrenched its values, what are the specific pieces of diction and specific words that get repeated so that you're creating this cage of language and orthodoxy around your people. And I think that's something that fascinates me about religion in general, especially like going to church growing up. You could pull an entire hour-long sermon out of a specific sentence, and you're just picking apart the wording. And anytime you use similar wording, you create an entire body of connotations around that. And so I don't know if that's all sort of what you were going to say, but that's what fascinated me about her.
Well, definitely, I agree. I agree. What I was gonna say also, though, is like, you have these cults that normally people wouldn't see as a cult. But once I read this, I kind of saw it everywhere. Like Peloton, for instance.
Oh, sure.
It's like
Yes.
there's like a branding. But that's the same thing with, with using certain diction. There's phrases, there's a branding to it. But I do, there are people who go into something and then it like sort of like it veers in another direction.
Yeah.
And I wasn't 100% sure in the beginning whether or not certain characters whether they had an end goal or whether this was just the road they were following. And it just felt really claustrophobic in the way that it should when you're
Yeah.
reading horror, especially about, this community and people who come together like this.
Yeah. Well, and I wanted the characters to feel like various archetypes. I think that in this book, and in this world in general, but especially in Galloway, there are two layers of characters. That you have the central characters who are more realistic and a bit more grounded and complex. And in Galloway's case, that was her and her friend Emma. And that's kind of it for her little bubble. And then everyone outside of that is this kind of archetype. One of my favorite characters to play around with was Eddie Spaghetti, because we meet him and he's this very like over the top, jovial, just like a very straightforward Italian restaurant owner who's like, oh, you like the spaghetti, and he gets activated by this cult and becomes sort of a different persona. And I feel like that felt very true to my experience, especially of the 2016 election, when we were really starting to see just how far people were willing to go. Like there were many people that I liked and respected who then that other persona comes out. And it's like, oh shit, you weren't just the nice Italian restaurant owner, like you really hate immigrants or whatever, and so those were the ensemble character, and in general the ensemble is just so much fun to play with in this one. So Eddie Spaghetti was one. Dr. Eric was my second favorite, the sort of creepy principal. And I think that you raise a good question that like, why do these people get suckered in, or what is it about them that makes them feel reinvigorated or re-empowered by narratives like this? And I think for people like Eddie Spaghetti and Dr. Eric, it's just an excuse to let loose and let your to do the things that you always secretly wanted to do. And I think we're already starting to see some of that rhetoric today. But it's those are the moments that I think about when I think about stories like this. And I think that I mean, not to like, boost my own whatever, but I think that stories like this are especially important because it makes it more palatable when you have this remove of fiction and monsters and fun, goofy, speculative elements to like really talk about, like, okay, there are pooping pigs and whatever, but this is what it would look like. It would be fun at first, and then you're stuck, and that's even the cult of social media. I feel that way about Instagram. Like, it was fun at first, and now I'm like stuck on it. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, I think the spread, it's easier to spread that way. When Galloway's a teenager, that's like the very beginning of Facebook.
yeah,
The people were splintered between Friendster and MySpace,
MySpace,
but
yeah.
it wasn't like it is. It didn't have there wasn't really the engagement on either of those particular, companies or platforms that there is now.
Right.
And, you maintained your page and you had your top eight and you put on your favorite music and it was loud and obnoxious and annoying. And that was pretty much it. But now it's really just crazy how quickly these things can spread.
Yeah.
But it was I don't want to give anything away, but it was interesting watching the story in these two different time periods and sort of seeing the aftermath 10 years later.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, I always, when I start a story, have the central images that I want to hit, and I feel like everything around those is gravy. If certain plot elements change or characters come and go, that's fine as long as I can have these central images that were the dream of the story from the jump. And for this one, it was the girl in her basement who starts a gathering, a cult or whatever. And then the flip side of that, she's running away from the cult that she's started, that it's grown beyond her. And that, and then a detective who is investigating something in a small town and has to navigate some kind of weird celebration in order to put pieces together. And so those were sort of the images that I was working towards. And it's, oh my God, I would never recommend, I can't imagine doing a dual timeline ever again, because I had so much fun, like I said, doing the ensemble of 2009 characters, but then to meet them again in 2019 was like having to write a whole second ensemble, and it drove me nuts. But I always think that's so much fun in stories, to see the impact that things have years later, because I think that's, again, something that's important for us to keep in mind now. How do we unravel the narratives that have stuck on us? How do we get back to their roots and really like pull at them? Yeah, I don't know, I'll stop myself before I go on a whole
Yeah,
rant.
no, without a doubt. I really liked this book. It's a lot of fun. It's also super creepy, and there's definitely some body horror. I don't want to talk too much about it, but there is some body horror. What is next for this universe? And you?
I don't know exactly what's next for this universe. I have one book that, the three that are out now, Edenville, The Poorly Made, and Galloway's Gospel. Those I think are standalones, kind of on like a parallel level with each other. You can enter the world from any of those. And now I kind of want to move on to phase two, where I'm like starting to write the works that are exploring the world that has been affected by the events in these books. And so have to have a little author's note at the beginning that's like, if you haven't read Edenville, you might want to. So I want to do something like that kind of ties them together. I think it'll be like the next one I want to do is like an isolated, some catastrophe strikes one of the other towns in Renfield County, and they're cut off and they have to deal. And there's monsters because gotta have some monsters in there. So I don't know what that one will look like, but the one that I'm working on now is a complete standalone. It is The Shining as an escape room. So you go to a creepy hotel for a weekend, and if you can survive the whole time and solve all the puzzles, you win big bucks. And I've been really excited about that one. So I'm just turned in the second draft of that to my editor, and she seems really excited about it, knock on wood. So we're going to say she has no edits. We're going to move straight into production. This is what we're manifesting. So that's what I've been big on the brain for me lately.
Thank you so much, Sam. Galloway's Gospel comes out when?
September 16th.
So check it out. So once again, this was Jessica with Syosset Libraries Turn the Page podcast. My guest was
Sam Rebelein.
And we are going to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.